Hi, and welcome to a new incubation talk at Dutch Game Garden. My name is Arje Loep, and I'm here with Martijn van Zwieten. Martijn, thanks for being here. Could you
My pleasure.
quickly introduce yourself?
Of course. I'm Martijn. Right now, I'm a freelance consultant. I have held various positions in the games industry over the last 10 years. I've done some PR, I've done some marketing, I've done some business development, and right now I'm mostly focused on strategy development for companies in the creative industry.
Cool. Can you talk a little bit about your history? How did you roll into the industry?
Initially, that was an internship at the company that did distribution and marketing for Capcom.
So cool.
Okay. Started as an intern, became a marketing manager after that. And then I started doing freelance marketing management for game companies.
Cool. And you said right now creative industries?
Yes.
Why the creative industries?
Well, two reasons. One, it's where I have the most experience. So I don't think there's a lot of rhyme to, providing consultancy and advice on things that you don't know a lot about.
Yeah,
so I want to keep it within my realm of expertise. And also because I really like the creative industries. There's the creative component, I feel, isn't really as prevalent in other industries. And I think that's really where my experience and my perspective can really be a counterbalance to the creativity to make sure that there are also a lot of sound business decisions.
Right, because what can that creative component bring? What is the extra thing that maybe helps you do a better job? Or
well, actually, I don't think it's the extra. I think it's the core thing.
Okay.
Especially in the creative industries. So I would say more that what I do is the extra thing.
Okay.
Someone from the industry that I know posted something on Facebook today, actually, that said, well, as from a business perspective, you cannot buy sort of the combination of life experiences and experience that your creative team puts together and turns into like a tangible product that people can actually experience.
Right.
You need those people to do that. So from my perspective, the creative part is the core, and I just stand at the sidelines and try to help people make better business decisions.
Right. And what kind of products or what kind of companies do you get to work with?
So that differs. Maybe I can start with sort of the companies that I've worked with over the past couple of years. So as a PR and marketing manager, I've worked with mostly indie companies and like AA companies.
Yeah.
So companies that usually don't have their own offices in various parts of the world. They have to do everything themselves, so they can use a little bit of extra help.
Yeah.
I've also worked as an operations manager at Koek & Becker. Koek & Becker is still in the games industry, but they make high-end game art prints.
Yeah.
So there, I was working, for example, with clients like Square Enix or CD Projekt Red to turn their assets into products that they can actually be proud of. So not like lunch boxes or but things they can actually be proud of as artists.
Yeah.
Most recently, I've worked, like before I turned freelance consultant, I worked at Utomic, which is a Dutch streaming, or I shouldn't say streaming, subscription gaming company.
So when people come to you, what's kind of in general, the questions that they have? What are they're asking? What are they asking for?
It differs a little bit. Mostly, it's about sort of getting out of a rut. Or maybe not so much a rut, but they want more or they want something better, but they're not exactly sure how to reorganize their current resources in a way that allows them to move forward to where they want to be.
Right. So, and you help them get a better focus or a better way of distributing the way where they work or where they spend their time?
Among other things. So, for example, one company came to me. They've been in the games industry for a long time. Their company's been around for a long time, and they've been steady.
Plateaued a little bit, maybe.
They plateaued a little bit. Well, they've been sort of at the same level for about 19 years. As well, at some point we do want to be not so much a bigger company, but they just want, maybe bigger projects, or they want to get to a point where they can maybe even think about selling the company.
Okay.
But how do you get there if all you're used to is sort of being at the same level, doing some work for hire, doing a little bit of your own projects, and that's sort of a loop that you're stuck in.
Is it important for them to, in this example, to have a clear vision of where they want to go?
I think so, yeah. I think that's actually the most important thing.
Okay.
If you know where you want to go, then you can start breaking it into smaller steps on how you want to get there. Yeah. And then it becomes a lot more manageable.
And when you because if they have a vision, clear vision, where do you start? What is your first question when you take on a project like that?
That is actually, what do you want to, what is your core question? There's always, usually the way people present it is it's a story. So they're somewhere and they want to get somewhere, but they're not exactly sure what. The key thing for me is to boil it down to one question, because if it's different questions, then there are different answers possible, and they probably won't get out of my services what they want. So it's about bringing it down to one question that they want to get solved. And a lot of times it starts with, okay, so with me asking, what is your goal? What do you want to accomplish? And then drilling down from there. And
that is what are your goal? What is your goal as a company, right? That's the main value or main mission, and it's not the product per se. Or could it be both? Or
could be. What you see, especially with smaller companies, those two are usually intertwined. Because you're not really a big company yet with a big portfolio of products or services. So a lot of times, at least for the foreseeable future, those two are the same. But I do encourage people to look beyond that because, especially in the creative industries and the games industry, it's such a hit-driven economy that if you don't have a plan for the next project or the next step, then you're basically leaving it up to luck.
And if they don't have a long-term plan, do you sit together with them to talk about that and create that? Or is that something that they should do on their own?
They want to. I do encourage people to do it by themselves, or at least to start on their own. Because it's their company, it's their dreams, it's their life. So it should be something that resembles what they want to do, rather than something that I advise them to do just because I have an MBA and I'm telling them this is the right decision. And for if depending on your restraints, maybe it is enough to do this as a hobby and not really have like a million-year plan. That can be fine as well.
Yeah, because the companies that we have right here are either young companies or small companies or starting companies. What can someone like you mean for someone like them? A starting company doesn't have a lot of resources yet, can't throw a lot of money at a business proposition. What kind of help can you give these kinds of companies?
The easiest thing is I'm always open for just grabbing a cup of coffee and sort of soundboarding, just to see what kind of issues are you running into, what do you want to solve. And I'm always happy to share resources. I mean, there are a lot of websites that will tell you most of the things that I could tell you how to do, with either free documents or templates or reports or stuff like that. Always happy to share whatever I know in that regard. But also there are actually a couple of government subsidies that allow companies to basically get help for free. So start as an international business. I think some of you might know that you can actually get a voucher to join certain conferences abroad, but you can also use them for coaching. And in that case, it's tied to internationalization. So if you want to launch your product internationally, given some restraints and some demands, then you can actually get like a consultancy trajectory for mostly free.
And for you, when you start working with smaller companies or companies in general, it probably depends on what they're asking of you, but how long can a project take? What kind of time frame? Do you need to sit with them for an hour every week, or do you want to go in-house, and how does that work?
Right. That's a good question. It differs wildly. I would say especially for a lot of the smaller companies, my role would mostly be to ask questions that make them think in a different way about what they're doing, sort of taking a little bit of a step outside of the creative aspect of it and trying to think of it more along the terms, okay, so what is the best business decision? What does this mean for my cash flow? What does this mean for when, when do I start finding partners? When do I start my marketing plan? Just outside of the creative aspect.
Yeah.
That's about asking questions. So there it's mostly, I would say a lot of times enough to touch base every once in a while. So that can be once a week. It can also be once a month.
Yeah.
A lot of times there's enough homework that people can get started and do a lot of things themselves.
Yeah.
If you are a little bit, maybe a little bit of a bigger company, you have a little bit of a more wicked problem. So something with more moving parts that requires a little bit more diving into, then it makes more sense that I'm more hands-on or maybe even do part of the work myself. Yeah. But it's really anywhere between I do everything or I just ask them.
Yeah, because a lot of the people here also are basically the managing director of their company, but also one of the main people creating the product.
Yeah.
And those could be two completely different positions. What you're saying is that you are helping them to kind of take a step back, get a better overview of what the business is actually about, to help them get better decisions, right?
Yes.
Did I formulate that?
Yeah, you can summarize it.
All right. We talked about goals. Those are very important, long-term and short-term, but also long-term. Mm-hmm. Is it important for you to know what a company is, who a company is targeting? So the target audience, is it why?
Yeah, because you're selling a product in the very end. You're selling a product to an end consumer or a customer. As a consumer is a little bit of a, I like customer better.
Okay.
They have to want to buy your product. It's not enough that you build something or you make something and then people are going to find you and buy it. You have to actually convince people that they might want this in their lives. If you don't think about it from their perspective, I think it's a very selfish thing to do because you're expecting them to give you their hard-earned money. So it makes sense that you also think about what they want, what their desires are, what their needs are from whatever product you're making. So I think it's the most important thing.
And when should companies start thinking about that?
From the start.
From the start?
Yeah,
because I think a lot of companies here also make the game that they really enjoy themselves. So they're like the first customer, so to speak.
Yeah, I think even in that at that point in time, it makes sense to get a little bit of a wider perspective. At the very least, find some friends that are willing to test some of your early like development code, or just get a little bit of a wider perspective, because the risk is that you're making a game for you. And then it turns out that you're actually the only one that like this particular combination of mechanics and art or
And talking about the target audience, if a company doesn't know well enough who the target audience is that a problem? And what can you do to help them with that?
It doesn't have to be a problem. So I think for games specifically, everyone is mostly fishing in the same pond. There's a little bit of segmentation based on what type of genre game you're making, but a lot of times you're never not competing with another product, because there are always similar products, and there's always people are always going to have to choose: do I buy your game or this other game? Especially if you're not a AAA. You're all making $10-15 games for Steam. So there's a lot of competition. It helps to know as much as possible about what probably your target audience is. It's not an issue if you don't know exactly, because it's always a little bit of an estimation.
But then still, you need to set yourself apart from exactly the competition that you're talking about, $10 to $15 on Steam.
Exactly. So you try to know as much as possible about your target audience, and you try to know as much as possible about your game and what sets that game apart from other games in the same genre or on the same platform. So it's both looking into your audience and looking into how your audience might see your game. Yeah,
and that's basically what we've been talking about today, branding, because that's one of the topics today. Important part of branding is knowing the target audience. We just talked about that, but also creating a message that connects your product to that target audience. Do you help with messaging? Is that something that you can do, or is it something that you can form an opinion about and
should
a company do that themselves?
All right, let me break that down. So that's not really something that I help with.
Okay.
That's part of what I used to do as a PR and marketing manager. It's not really what I do anymore.
Okay.
That's really more of a PR marketing branding question. I mean, there are many companies in the Netherlands even that can help with that, and a lot of really good ones that are also highly specialized in the games industry. Should you do it yourself? I think looking at the current social media landscape and just the landscape of how developers interact with their target audience, I don't think there's any escaping that you're going to have to do part of it yourself.
Yeah.
Because that also allows you to put your character and your how do you say that? Sort of a little bit of yourself into your brand and your game, and it allows people to get a little bit closer when they can interact with you directly. Yeah. And I think barring, big bags of cash that you can throw at direct marketing, it's a very, very effective way of getting to your end customer directly.
Yeah, with personality or your core values streaming into your message, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
The landscape of making games and publishing games has changed. It's always changing, but 10 years ago it was much easier to self-publish and self-publish and earn money. These days it's much more important to find good partnerships.
Yeah.
Is that something that you can help with, determining which kind of partnerships? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So finding partnerships in the core is about figuring out what you want to do yourself and what you want to give to someone else, and why. So I wouldn't recommend just anyone say, look, always go find a publisher. The question is always, what do you need them for, and what do you lose in return?
Yeah.
So that's definitely something I can help with. First of all, figuring out, okay, so what do you want to gain? Why do you want to find these specific partnerships? And what are you getting in return? And also finding the right partners. I mean, I have a wide network in the games industry at this point. So that's always something I'm happy to help with. Yeah.
And so what you would need upfront is to know from a company what they need and what they're looking for, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So they need to get that ask. What's their ask? Pretty clear, I guess.
Yes.
How do you like to convey that ask? We usually tell them you need a pretty good pitch deck with a concise story and a good ask. So what's the opportunity? Yeah. Is that something that you would ask for as well from a client, or what do you do?
I can do with a lot less than a very specified deck, because a lot of times my role is also to help perfect that deck.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people have an idea, they have a little bit of a pitch, and then first I take them again one step back, say, okay, why do you want this? And which partner then would be the best fit for you? And then you tailor your deck to that partner as much as possible, and that's something I can then help with.
Do you make a new deck for every partner?
No.
No, okay.
No, I use the same base usually, because a lot of partners want to see the same things, or at least the same cornerstones. And then you tailor.
And in these cooperations, like, what is important to you? I understand what's important to the client. They need a better business proposition, or what's important to you? What do you enjoy?
So I'm not a creative myself, or at least I don't see myself that way. So what I really like is working with people that are very passionate about their own product. And that's something that I've always found to be the case in the games industry. That's what really attracted me to the games industry in the first place. And that's, that's never changed in the past 10 years. Everyone, especially if you go to events or, events like this, everyone is working on something that they're really passionate about. They can talk for hours about what they're doing, where they think the industry is going. And so I take a little bit of that energy, and then in return, I try to help a little bit on the business side.
What do you need do you set goals for yourself and the company to work together? How do you get to those goals, and when are you happy with where you've gotten to?
So I try to define very, very strict deliverables from the interaction between myself and the company, because I want to make very sure that at the end they get what they wanted from the first place, and what we agreed on. Yeah. So that can be either a number of documents or a pitch deck of at least 40 slides, or depending what they need. Yeah. So I try to make that as specific as possible on a specific deadline with as many specifics in there as I can. That's when I deliver my part. Then I'm sort of happy because I've done what I was asked, but I'm mostly happy when they can use that information and they can actually grow as a company. They can sell more games, or they get that partnership. That's when I'm really happy. Yeah,
yeah. So there is definitely your deliverable, but also what follows after that. So you have to kind of keep in touch.
I mean, if my advice doesn't really make a difference, then
you've done the work, but
arguably it wasn't worth anything. Yeah.
All right. For companies with smaller budgets, what is kind of the basic things that you can do for them, and where do you think what's the easiest way that you can help them?
I think getting their main goals down on paper, and making sure that whatever they have planned all adds up to those goals. A lot of times, or at least what I've seen, is it's very easy to copy what another company is doing, right? So everyone's on Twitter, we should also go on Twitter. Maybe, but maybe not, depending on what your goals are and what your resources are, and what you have or don't have that you can actually put towards those goals. So my main added value, I think, is in streamlining the strategy and the plan to the goals that you actually have.
Yeah, because it like you said, it probably some companies will try to be everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, newsletters. And if you're a small company, that's probably not manageable, or not in a way that makes sense and gets you results, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or something like, should you be at both PAX and GDC, for example? Yeah. I mean, that depends on how much money you have, what audiences are going to go to both events. Are any of your targeted partners going to be at either or both of those events? Make sure that you know why you're doing what you're doing. And
do you think there's like certain channels, media channels, or events that you definitely should go to as a small developer, or maybe some that are overused?
Yeah. Ooh, that's hard to say. I mean, I have my own favorite conferences, so I always at least go to Gamescom each year because it's pretty much in our backyard. It's in Germany. It's affordable if you book your hotel room way in advance. Yeah. GDC is always a good one for North America. But then now with the coronavirus, I think with a lot of the cancellations, it's showing that there's a lot of those aren't really accessible enough. So what I'm seeing now is there's a lot of attention for maybe setting up more virtual conferences where it's a lot easier to attend. And I think that will alleviate some of the stress and some of the pressure of being everywhere and flying all over the world just to maybe shake that one person's hand. Yeah. So I think that's definitely changing right now.
I think that the virtual meetings are maybe a little bit more difficult to kind of get your message across. That would be, I mean, for now, we're 2020, we're taping this early 2020. If you're going to GDC and that just got canceled, you don't have another option unless you go and try to see who's there anyway. But I don't know, that physical presence and through a screen, there's a big difference trying to get your message across. And usually, do you think it's important, is it all about the case, like the business case, or is there the personal connection between a publisher and a game developer important as well, or shouldn't it matter?
It shouldn't matter, but it does. I think depending on a little bit on, I mean, it probably depends case to case, but I think the personal connection is definitely maybe one of the most important things. Yeah. I mean, I know that's definitely the case for like investors that invest just in companies in other sectors, you want to know what the management team is. Who are they? Are their core values in line with yours? Are they going to do the things that you also find important? Because it's your money. You have to be on the same page.
Yeah. So even like core values can be shared between a big publishing house and a small developer. Yeah, we've had Paul Hanraats here who talked about taking game developers on board and then sending one of his people over to sit with the team for a week and get to know them. And
that's smart.
Sounds like a good advice. All right, I'm going to hand over my chair to somebody else.
All right.
I'll be right back.
Hi, I'm DeLorean. We actually met 1.5 years ago.
We have, yeah.
Already. I was wondering, you were talking about finding partnerships. And I was wondering, like, if you want to find a partner, like I'm looking for an investment or I want to make a second version of my game, then the hardest question, I think, is like, what will I give in return? And like, how do you get to that conclusion of like, what can I give? Or that's for me the hardest part in the entire process.
I get that. I guess the easiest way to get to that point is to make an overview of what you need in order to get to that second version, because that's your ask. You want to know how much do I need, money-wise, but maybe also expertise-wise, in order to make the second version. That's what you're going to ask. And then the second part is, what value does my company or my game have? And that means either part of your sales. A lot of times for publishers, that's part of the deal. Like a lot of the sales revenue goes to them, or maybe they buy into your company and they get what's the word I'm looking for? Aandelen, stocks. Shares.
Equity share.
Equity share, yeah, that's also a possibility. And it can be anything and everything in between. It really is a conversation between you and that potential investor on where that opportune or the optimal balance is.
But then, like, the thing for me is, like, how do you start that kind of conversation? Because in my case, I have been talking with two possible investors. They wanted to invest in my company.
Good.
Like part of my shares. But then I'm like, but do I want that? And then at the same time, I only have one game now. But what if I come up with a different game? Because then they're automatically part of that. I have no clue of how to see how that cooperation would go.
Yeah. There are a lot of ways to get to that information. Then it becomes very technical, though. It's it's hard to explain. You have to really value your company then, but because if they're going to be buying into your company, then you're best off following all the rules, sort of the rules, written and unwritten rules of valuing a company and determining what your equity is worth. There's a number of ways to do that. I'd be more than happy to sit down at some point and walk you through that, because it's, you have to do your profit and loss statements. You have to do you have to basically put everything your company is worth and will be worth in one sheet, and then you still have to guess or guesstimate what that would be worth. It's a bit tricky, but it's definitely doable, even for small companies. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure. I'm going to hand over to the next one. Thanks.
Hi, Thomas Mausgo from Gobbledygook Games. We have Indigo coming up this summer, and of course there's a meet to match portion attached to that. Now, we've talked quite a bit about various potentially shady dealings that publishers might be up to, but what about the other side of the coin? How do we make sure that we don't come across as complete, noobs, for lack of a better term, when we sit down with a potential investor or publisher and such? Which are the absolute musts when you sit down there?
Ooh, okay. Prepare. Just put a lot of time into preparing not just your side of the story, so not just a pitch, but also knowing who the publisher is. What type of games do they usually have in their portfolio? Who are the people? Can you find out maybe what they're interested in, what they think is important? There are usually a lot of ways to get that information. I mean, it's a small industry, so probably the amount of connections between you and whoever will be on the other side of that table is, it's not that many people. So there are usually ways of getting that information and figuring out, what do they think is important and how can I match my pitch to them. Sorry.
Yeah. So you'd also individualize your pitch per different publisher, as it were.
Yes. Yeah. Like I said earlier, is a lot of pitch decks have the same base. Everyone wants to know how many games are you going to sell, how much do you need in order to finish the product, but then you tailor it to the investor or to the publisher.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
You talked about guesstimating sales, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do you go about guesstimating sales?
Yeah, that's a tricky one.
It's a very difficult proposition.
Yeah. So there are a number of resources for example, if you're going to be on Steam. I know that you yourself just launched a resource that can help with at least getting a little bit of data points into your estimate. And I think it's always worth the effort of at least trying to get that information on paper. Even if it turns out to be wildly different, then you've gone through the steps of thinking, okay, so what goes into selling a game? What do I need to think about? What's the sort of the ceiling and what's the bottom of what this game could do?
Right, and publishers will probably have their own tools at their disposal, so they might not be interested in exactly your data points, but more the fact that you've went through the motions of actually...
Yeah, so what publishers are looking for is they want to know if you've thought everything through. And of course, part of their role is to also bring in some expertise and help you on some of the elements that you're maybe not an expert in yourself. But they want to know that you've thought of the big picture, like most of the elements are in place, so that they're not taking a huge gamble by, letting you do your thing sort of unchecked.
And also maybe in a pitch deck, if you start projecting forward how long the development is going to take, do you also take into account like a release date and also maybe work after that? Is that something you should always take into account?
I would, yeah, because you want all of your resources to be accounted for. So if you need time and you need people after launch in order to maintain or how do you say, keep the product up and running, then that should be in there because it's people that cannot work on a new game.
All right. Well, a last question then on my end. Where can people find you?
They can find me at Dutch events. They can find me on my website mostly.
Which is?
ORYX Consulting with a hyphen between ORYX and Consulting.
ORYXconsulting.com.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. That's it for today's incubation talk at Dutch Game Garden. I would like to thank you for watching and Martijn for his expertise. Martijn, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.